The engine bay is tidied up. I'm moving on to the next stage, which is the engine. So I've had this engine built about, God, it's probably 4 years ago. So it's not, obviously the numbers matching motor was missing, but it's a 440. It's a later model casting, but I've run cast pistons. I'm running about 9.7 to 1 compression ratio. I'll be putting on an Edelbrock heads with an RPM Edelbrock intake manifold. I'm going to try and attempt to make headers for it as well to make the most of the engine, but not too big a camshaft, just middle of the road, have a little bit of an idle, but I want it to make lots of torque. That's the main thing I'm interested in a big car like this. So it should be pretty healthy little motor, and at the moment I'm just going through what parts I've got. Looks like a bit of a jigsaw. So this is parts from the engine that was when I pulled it down, but also parts I've collected along the way. It's always a bit difficult unless you've got the original motor with all the original components, because this car is factory air conditioned and the engine I had didn't have the factory air conditioning components, so I've got to scrape up, scrounge, find, try and get the original bracketry to hold the compressor. I've got a new compressor, it doesn't look it, but I've got a brand new compressor sitting in there that I've had waiting for the job. I've got the transmission rebuilt, so there's a 727, basically stock. I run about a 2500 stall converter, nothing too big, and now it's just a matter of putting the jigsaw together. So we'll start with probably getting it up on an engine crane, and the engine stand I should say, and then yeah, start looking at assembly. And the accessories is where I'll take all the time, is actually working out all the right pulleys, mounting the alternator, power steering, and getting all that stuff sorted out. And then when it does finally get in the car, I've got to work out what I'm going to do about the headers. So I've got some B-body headers coming that I might modify to make them work, hopefully in a C-body. I haven't done that before, so we'll wait and see how that goes. Finally to assembly. Been waiting for years for this, literally been sitting on the floor for years. So I did have the short built, my engine builder actually machined and assembled the short for me. He really did the hard work, so, and dialed the camshaft in. So all I'm really doing is assembling the accessories and front of the motor, the easy stuff. So I'm just setting up the timing case cover. Make sure I put a bit of oil on the seal. Got to make sure you don't run anything dry so it doesn't get caught when you finally do start the motor. It's better to have it lubricated. Just looking around for the bolts. Now moving on to the harmonic balancer. So always just run a little bit of oil on the seal. Can't have too much oil. Just line up the keyway, and you've got to tap on the harmonic balancer with a nylon hammer, just so I can get the bolt started. And then I'll pull it in after that. More oil on the thread. That's very important when you tighten up this bolt, because it's got a bit of load on it. Now moving on to the underside. Big block Chrysler motors have a external oil pump, which is kind of cool. If you have any problems with your oil pump, you can literally change it out in a 15 minutes with the engine still in the car, so something's quite unique to those. I don't know any other makes that have external oil pumps. There probably are, but I don't know what they are. Oil everywhere, of course, on the threads. You do lots of walking in this job, walking around the shop, getting tools, picking up bolts, finding things. Do many steps a day. I think I average about 14,000 steps a day, which is quite a bit, I guess.
More than me.
More than Giraffe, that's for sure. Cleaning the sump. These have all been dipped in the tank 4 years ago when the engine was built. I had all that stuff done. Now I'm just fitting up the oil pickup. Got to make sure you get it sitting in the right place. You want to make sure it's just sitting flush with the bottom of the sump. That's what I'm just trying to confirm, that it's not riding on the sump, but it's also wants to be almost touching the bottom, or virtually touching the bottom of the sump. So I'm just, by putting a few little different size items on the bottom of the pickup, I can determine how far the pickup is off from the bottom of the sump, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm trying to do now. And with the torch through the sump plug hole, you can tell how close it is to. So it looks like I'm satisfied with that. So we're on to the sump gasket. Just a little thin smear of Celastic or urethane around both sides of the cork gasket. And always an extra dob either side of the rear main cap and the timing case cover cap at the front as well. You always put a little bit of dob either side of those. Same there, smear on the other side of the gasket. No rocket science here, just just take your time, be careful, just be observant on what you're doing. Like I said, I don't like to run too much elastic, just a little bit to make it tacky. And it is cork, so you can't over tension it. You've got to be careful how tight you do it. There is a setting, there is a torque setting for it. I think it's 10 pounds or 15 pounds, I can't remember. Get all the bolts in started loose first. I'm just whizzing them down, nipping them down with the electric quarter drive ratchet. I don't want any tension on the cork. I'm just spinning it just to make it faster for me. Just spinning them down, just so they're snug against the cork. And then get a tension wrench. It looks like I'm nipping it by hand first with a quarter drive, making sure I'm not over tensioning it. And another good thing to do is look at the cork. Make sure it's not squishing out too much when you pull it down. You don't want to squish the crap out of the cork. It'll over tension it, and it'll leak. So I'm just tensioning each one. Very little tension, doesn't take much at all. Just going around each one, making sure it's all even. Not exactly thrilling footage, but a lot of this work you do on cars is pretty monotonous. There's nothing special about it, but it's got to be done. C-body sumps, by the way, are unique. You can see a real scallop at the side of the sump there, which actually gives clearance to the idler arm. So you always know a C-body sump when you see one. Flip it back over again. Be nice to have a hand sometimes when I'm doing this, but I haven't. Oh. Okay, I'm just cleaning the face of my hands, just making sure the faces of the deck are clean for the heads. Pop on the head gaskets. And I actually changed my mind. I've got 440 Cells heads on there now, which are instead of the Edelbrock heads. I'm going to put the Edelbrock heads on another project coming up. So these look good because when you paint them up, they look factory, but they're aluminium. They flow better than factory. They've got better springs, better valves. So they're a good alternative from the factory head. Once it's all together and you paint it engine colour, you can't even tell. Making sure you have oil on all your engine head bolts before you torque it down. Preferably assembly lube, actually, not oil. It's like a very light grease. Put that on all the heads, on the threads of the bolts before we pull the heads down. Once again, I'm using the rattle gun, but I'm not pulling any tension. I'm just zipping the bolts down. Just make it faster. Day out with the car club. Bit of a mixed bag. Harry's putting his roof on, he's worried about getting sunburnt. Adam's in his GDX. We're all making a run back to our cars. Craig in the Challenger. Ian in the Coronet. Okay, is it? Okay, getting close to putting the engine back in the car. Starting to get a bit exciting now. This car probably has an engine in it for 20 years, who knows how long, but a long time. Unfortunately not numbers matching engine, but it is a period correct 440, a bit spiced up with aluminium top end, and that creates problems because I've got an RPM Performer intake manifold, which raises the carburettor height, which affects your kickdown setup. So I'm not sure if you're aware of it with Mopars. If you are in the Mopars, you'll know, but otherwise this is your accelerator, and when you hit full throttle, this valve here is meant to kick back the transmission. There is adjustments for that. This has been hodgepodged together with a whole bunch of odds and sods that I had laying around the place. I'm hoping it's going to work okay. I think so. The basic term is normally when that's at full throttle, your valve should be at full position. So sometimes you got to try it on the car. There is an adjustment slot here. I can actually adjust a little bit one way or the other, so try it on the road and see what it drives like. Other than that, make sure you put in a new reverse neutral safety switch. Better if you can. I've got a high torque starter motor. I've just got to make up transmission lines. I'm going to rough those out, leave them long, and then take them out, put the engine in, and I'll put them in last and bend them up to match the radiator. So the transmission's been rebuilt, fresh motor. Probably said this before, but this is a 440, about 9.7 to 1. I'm running cast pistons. They were basically Roadrunner standard replacement pistons for back in the day. Got a medium-sized camshaft. I don't want it too rough for idle. I want a reasonably smooth idle, but I want a bit more power up top. It's got some 440 source heads, which flow better than stock, obviously lighter, aluminium. RPM before intake, as I said, and it's got a 750 vac secondary Edelbrock carburetor. So it should be pretty spicy. Hopefully it'll go good. I'm going to try and make some extractors for it. So that's something I haven't done on a C-body before, so I usually run the high flow manifolds. If I'm going to attempt to make extractors, I've got some B-body ones that I was given that were relatively new, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to modify those to make them fit the car. So that'll be later, but with a bit of luck later on today, I'll be able to hopefully sling this motor in the car for the first time it's had an engine. I don't know how long. I'm going to say it's a long time though. So finally, putting the engine in the car. It's always very satisfying when you're building a car to finally get the engine in. And you know, it feels like you're getting somewhere when you see a new motor put in the car. And you are, but it's like a turning point on the build, getting it all back mechanically together. So this is a little tricky doing it by yourself. I'd normally recommend you have someone help you. You can see what's around, if you're bumping into anything, or it just takes a lot longer. Usually I'd have someone pushing down on the back of the transmission, but as you can see, I put a bit of cardboard in there that stops scratching the tunnel and also stops scratching the gearbox. It works perfectly fine, just gives you that bit of extra angle as you come in. And just slowly bring down the transmission, missing the sump, and just inching your way in. You can see it's really not that difficult. C bodies are a lot easier because there's definitely more room than trying to put in a B body or an E body, or especially an A body. So basically that's it. That's the hardest part. Once you're there, you know, it's the hard part's done. Mightn't look it because it's sitting on a funny angle. So I've got to get under the car now, and I run a tiny little trolley jack, and I face it lengthways with the car, and then I jack the back of the transmission up to more the correct angle it needs to be, and then because it's running in line with the engine, you can actually skid it or push it, roll it forwards, and the little trolley jack will go with the transmission towards the back of the car as well. So now I'm just adjusting the body because when you're lifting such a big heavy weight up over the front of the car like that, I put the body down as low as I possibly can, but then you can't actually get the engine crane underneath the cross member, so I get it basically in the hole, and then I lift the car back up again, and that's what I'm talking about now. I'm just talking about lining up the transmission and getting the angles right. So now it's a matter of getting underneath, putting the little trolley jack in, and you'll see that's what the engine's doing now. It looks magical, but actually I'm underneath jacking the back of the transmission. Oh, there I am. So it's a bit of cat and mouse. You just got to go slowly and watch and get up and look and come back down, and so just slowly making little adjustments. Pushing, pulling, lifting, jacking the back, dropping the front, just backwards and forwards until you get it sitting on the engine mounts, and then I have to crawl under and literally have to get the rear cross member at least hanging in there with one bolt so that it stops the transmission from dropping down at the back. So that's what I'm aiming for. Manipulating, and I think that's the motor. You can see just plonk, there you go, just plonk down on the engine mount. So you go, the weight's off it now. So I just got to get under the car and make sure the cross member will hold the transmission. You're just wiggling it around, making sure the mounts are actually lined up with the holes. Pretty good. So there you go. Took about a total of 20 minutes in real time. Not too bad on your own. It's always a bit harder and slower. If I had someone to help, I would have got them to probably push the transmission down as it came in, but as it was, I'd use a bit of cardboard and I put it between the transmission and the hump on the floor, and it just slides under nice. Doesn't do any damage. So now I've just got the cross member sitting up there, one bolt. I haven't got the through bolts through the engine mounts yet because I'm going to need them left out, because I think I have to lift and lower the motor quite a few times to try and fit the extractors. And already looking at it, it looks like it's not a good spot for extractors on the C body. This torsion bar is right in the centre. So I'll see how that goes. That's something else I have to worry about later. Anyway, so first of all, we better make it safe and get this cross member in properly. So now I've got it basically sitting loosely on top of the cross member. You can see it hanging down on a bit of an angle. You just put the stand under the transmission extension housing, lift the transmission up high enough so it's out of the way, and then I concentrate on getting the rear cross member bolted in. They're pretty full on the C bodies because it's part of the construction or strength of the cross member of the car. So there's about 10 big heavy bolts that hold that rear cross member in place. So you got to make sure you go around and get them all loosely started before you commit, and then you can I can rattle them all up with a rattle gun. So that's what I'm doing here. Looks like I've got it in position. No, it looks like I'm putting a bit of load under the cross member, so I'm having trouble lining up one of the bolts, I'd say. So I've now just loaded the cross member a little bit to help get that alignment of that last bolt by it looks. Now I can just go around and tighten them all up. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 10 bolts to hold that in. So pretty good, nice and strong. Alright, that's in now. And now I'm just pushing the transmission across a little bit to line up the rear cross member. Okay, now I've got the bolts for the transmission. Really don't want to be too aggressive. They actually into the aluminium extension housing of the gearbox, and you don't want to rattle the crap out of them. The chassis is different. That's about that much. Okay. So I've got to make transmission lines. Just got to put the bolts through for the engine mounts. But like I said, I'm going to leave that for now. And I've got to actually attempt to see what these headers are going to look like. I've got no idea how well they're going to fit. Right, everything's there lined up, ready to go. We've got that speedo cables already lined up. Now, I thought I'd give you a bit better look underneath the car, because my wife, better known as Giraffe, is complaining about my lighting, saying how bad it is. So I've attempted to illuminate the underside of the car for the first time properly. Hopefully you can see it better. So, you know, it's looking reasonably neat. Like I said, it's I've said it many times, just want to tidy, not trying to win any shows. Get too carried away with making so much detail underneath, you can't enjoy them. So I just like to make it neat and tidy, clean everything as it goes back in, because before long, if you use the car, which I do, it's going to look dirty. So there's a bit of a look at that. Bring the lighting along further down. I don't know how well that lights up. But the car was originally undercoated car, so I basically just cleaned up what was already there. Same with the back here. Hope you can see some of my handiwork a bit better now. All the new floor sections have gone in. Obviously the new fuel tank. I don't know if you can see the wheelhouse there. And the diff in all its glory. With the new plumbing on it. Oop, I can't see that very well. And there's all the steel work on that side. Hopefully there's enough light in there. New shackles, new brake hoses, wheel cylinders, shoes, been through all those. All the normal things you do on a car when you rebuild it. Replaced all the rubber lines on the fuel tank. Obviously the fuel tank's been replaced. Yeah. So it's coming along. Singing for your breakfast. There you go. This one's for you. There you go. Come in for the brekkie in the morning. Little magpies. When you start singing again, this is going to go around the world.